I'm Todd, and I was naughty. I did everything wrong. I got kicked out of art school, I drank heavily, and I looked to other religions and versions of spirituality to get fulfilled. The problem was, I was in the occult and I didn't even know it. My life was a wreck, and I had to learn what it meant to have a relationship with Jesus.
And I'm Laura. I was super nice. I did everything right. I got saved young, went to Moody Bible Institute, got married, and followed the Christian rules to having a good life. Problem was, that formula didn't work. I had to change how I related with Jesus.
At the end of the day, what I learned is the very simple truth. Jesus is the answer, and the only one that will ever actually fulfill you.
Naughty
versus
nice.
And welcome back to Naughty versus Nice. Of course, I'm Todd.
And of course, I'm Laura.
And of course, I'm Kelly.
And of course. Okay, so ladies, we're already making fun of me, I feel like. So how's everything going?
Fantastic.
Oh, that was the small talk part, remember?
I know. I was caught off guard. I'm like, do people really want to know? No, they do not.
Some weeks you're the bug, some weeks you're the windshield. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm the bug.
Well, yeah, it's Kelly was like, well, why don't we do some small talk? You know, we'll just kind of have a little fun exchange, and we'll just kind of talk a little bit, and then we'll kind of introduce the topic. So, you know, I'm trying to human right now, like everybody else does.
We've met that quota. What's the topic?
Chop chop then. Let's get right back to it. Last week, one of the subjects that we covered is kind of the angels and demons subject. In the last number of years, this concept has gotten more popular. Most people might know it by the buzz term Nephilim. There's a term that's used in the Old Testament in Genesis. And who's dinging?
It's me. I can't shut it off on my computer no matter what I do. There you go.
Okay.
It's an old ingrained single mom thing. Like, you don't shut your phone off. So I always vibrate. Like, yeah, it's just old habit. Okay.
Your kids are adults.
I know. It's still there. It doesn't go away. It's like, there's an accident. People are like, that never happens. I'm like, it's happened several times. Okay. All right. I'm ready.
Okay. So last week we kind of talked we spent the whole episode talking about the concept of angels, the concept of demons, what they are, where they come from, how they're kind of broken down, and some of the main key verses that the Bible uses to discuss the subject. And one of the erroneous errors, one of the places that I think that people get turned around. Well, two things. First thing is the idea that somehow a good Christian never thinks about things that are naughty or evil ever. And so most people don't even want to look at the subject, don't even want to consider it or think about it. They think somehow if they, acknowledge the fact that Satan exists and his henchmen and minions, somehow they'll gain more power or it'll invite them into their life. Which, of course, is ironic because that's actually more superstition, more voodoo than it is actually a Christian worldview. We're underneath the blood of the Lamb. We're protected with the Holy Spirit being indwelt, we're protected by being indwelt by the Spirit. Believers don't have to worry about anything that's going on with demons. They're pesky. They're irritating. Maybe they can give you the SADS pretty, severely, but it's not something to be fearful of, if that kind of makes sense. So a lot of Christians will ignore the subject and the topic, and as a result, there's this gap or this void that's in their spiritual life where they'll fill it with the superstition or the silly nonsense of movies, film, and television instead of being grounded in what Scripture actually does say regarding these creatures.
And I think there's a good distinction that can be made because I've actually watched you have these conversations with people and watched them shut down and kind of superstition kind of rise to the surface. There's a difference between being fascinated by it and obsessed with it and consumed by it, and then just being factually informed about what the subject is. Those are two different things. And I think that the church commonly just thinks if you talk about it, you're obsessed and fascinated by it and you're opening some kind of door. And that's just not the case. But that's kind of where I see people kind of getting a little bit torn about how to approach it.
And look, I can appreciate it. I can understand not wanting to dwell on dark things, every single day, day in and day out. But this is something that's covered in the Bible. Satan's talked about in the Bible. Jesus had a bunch of one-on-ones with him. So if Jesus can talk to Satan, I feel like the believer can talk about him. Once again, not fascinated and fixated. If you get a little tickle in your belly and you get giddy about the idea of talking about really, really evil stuff, Okay, that's one of the warning signs to let you know what things you should interact with and what you shouldn't. Everybody's a little bit different. I know some believers that can have drinks, can go out and have a beer, and I know others that can't. They're because of how they're convicted by the Holy Spirit and that individual relationship that they have. So if that's you and this is a subject, you get a little tickle when you think about it, you're a little too excited about the idea of demons and angel monsters and things like that, maybe this is an area you need to stay away from. But for the average person or the average believer to treat it the way that they would, like I've talked about before, the idea of the Candyman figure in the movies, don't say his name 3 times in the mirror or he'll come get you with his hook when you sleep at night. That's not how it is.
Are you sure? Because I don't want to press my luck and do it. So I'm just saying.
So within the idea of this, and Christians will tell me all the time, look, I don't have any occult beliefs, but definitely don't say the name Lucifer because you might summon him or he'll hear you. It's like, okay, do you not have any occult beliefs or do you? Where are you at on it? Maybe the problem is you don't know what they actually are. So I kind of wanted to go in a little bit more depth about the subject of angels and demons and what the occult is, because they are the origin source of it. I would make an argument something like Satan is not the origin of the occult. He's the one that really refined it and streamlined it or something like that. Whereas the occult itself kind of came born from that whole verse that we talked about, the Genesis 6 verse, the pre-flood world. You had this situation where a bunch of angels got together, made an agreement, they made a pact, they made an oath. And I don't know if you remember, but the Bible says something to the effect of, don't go running around making oaths, guys. There's that one-to-one connection that we see. A bunch of angels made an oath. They decided they were going to go hug and kiss a bunch of women. They were going to come down to earth, hug and kiss a bunch of women. However that happened. And the result of it were this offspring hybrid, half angel, half human hybrid, this creature that the Bible, certain translation calls the Nephilim. Now, the argument that I would make is that when you start putting biblical history together with outside biblical texts, you find there's a lot of agreement about certain concepts and certain topics. This is one of them. So, and people say, well, you're only supposed to get everything from, whatever you get from the Bible, okay? I challenge you to change the brakes of your 1994 Ford Escort using only the Bible and not a Chilton's manual, So sometimes there are some books, believe it or not, where it's just giving you information. We're not getting spiritual awareness. We're not getting spiritual discernment. We're not getting spiritual guidance. We're not taking these books for those purposes, but it's more like history. It's more like information. And then just being discerning. We're comparing. The Bible says this is true. Do we see that in any other places in history? Is that something that can be backed up? I already believe it here, but if it's true here, we'll probably see it in other places, like, say, Greek culture, for example. And if it does show up there, what can we kind of surmise? What do the Greeks have to say about it? And what conclusions can we draw from these pieces of information?
I think it's good that you're clarifying. When you say the occult, it's easy for us to think it's the pentagram, it's the goat head. And while those things are obviously present in some of the rituals and such, we looked at a house once and I thought, this house feels weird. It feels weird. We went in the basement and there's this great big red pentagram drawn on the basement floor. And I was like, okay, there might be something here. It's not that it's not related, but when you take it back to this event, this origin, and then, of course, after the flood at the Tower of Babel, where you have the spreading of these cultures going in all different directions, but they take those original ideas that they still had, the Babylonian type ideas is what you kind of call it, and they create religions off of that. So really, the occult can be other world religions in their principles, in their ideas, in their rituals. It doesn't mean they're all bowing down and worshiping Satan as a cognitive thing. It's just that all the world religions all embrace a certain theology or a certain philosophy that seems to have things in common. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. And one of the reasons that there's value in this is that now the Christian has the arsenal, especially taking this, not making that association. But the instant that association gets made, you understand the Bible's true. So Mom, Dad, how come you say all the other religions are satanic? Well, son, why don't you sit down and we'll tell you about the Nephilim, we'll tell you about the fallen angels, we'll tell you about the pre-flood world, and then the post-flood world and the Tower of Babel incident. That's where everything comes from. And by the way, over 300 other stories exist cataloging this exact same event spread out all over the world. They all had their different variations and versions of it, but it becomes more tangible. It becomes real. And the idea that, what's it, something like after the freshman year, 3/4 of all Christian kids in college all walk away from Christianity because, not only is it, drugs, sex, and alcohol or whatever that they're competing with too, but now it's all these other ideas that parents have worked so hard to isolate their kids from. Now they're getting exposed to these ideas, and then kids are going, well, these ideas aren't, I didn't turn into a demon hearing this idea. What's going on? Were my parents just being overly protective or zealotrous, or I don't know, what's the word? Zealotosterous? Okay. I just made up a brand new word. You kind of see where I'm going with this. And then a lot of times parents are like, they're all baffled and confused. Like, I don't understand. I raised my kid in a Christian home. I did everything right. By sophomore year, they got half their head shaved. The other half's dyed blue. They got 20 different piercings in their face. And now they want me to call them demonkin as a gender. I don't understand what's going on. Understanding these concepts and understanding these things gives you grounded in reality, truth in scripture, to be able to speak to these topics on a level that your kids will understand when they're going through the things that they go through away from home in college or something. I hope I'm making a point.
And I think this is not necessarily on the Nephilim yet, but kind of justifying the explanation of these ideas is when I went to your presentation and you just had slideshow after slideshow after slideshow from all these different countries, different cultures, different countries, different locations, but they all had very similar artwork, very similar idols, very similar building structures. There was something there that was common, and that had never, I just don't look at things like that. I'm much more like the doctrinal mindedness of my personality. But I thought, I haven't ever thought of that. But just that alone is such a proving idea to offer your kids to say, listen, they're going to tell you the Tower of Babel and the other Bible stories aren't real. But look at this. Wouldn't that be a logical explanation as to why all the world has similar themes, stories, figures, artwork, buildings? It's just too coincidental that they all have the same theme going on.
And that's, anybody can look up, I think it's Ganesh, the the Hindu elephant god. And then you can compare images and traditional artwork that's hundreds of years old with the exact same figure that's found in Japan. And this is it's like the god of luck or whatever it is. If I'm going by memory right now. But the elephant god is in the exact same pose. It has the same costumey kind of characteristics to it, similar color characteristics to it. It is the same creature. It's the same quote unquote god. And most people don't know this. Most people don't know the origin of these things. So when it sounds like, well, people just made up gods in order to make it rain so that way they could grow corn. That's not at all. That's not at all where they come from and how they got into being and why they were popularized within these ancient cultures. So within this elephant god concept, that would be an example where it's very much a one-to-one. But you'll always find these like very similar features with it. It's not elephant people all the time or elephant gods all the time. Usually they're very reptilian based, they're very fish based, or they're very bird based. And there's a number of different reasons for that. But what you have is most likely the Bible doesn't say for sure, but one of the conclusions that you possibly can draw is the idea that these watchers, these angels that came down and made with women, had a serpent-like appearance. They were what we would call the seraphim or seraphim class of angels. Seraphim is the plural of seraph. And these are talked about, I think, if I remember correctly, in like Ezekiel, someplace in Ezekiel when he has the vision, the wheels in the sky, that kind of thing. And you'll find that there are many different sources that seem to indicate that these creatures are serpent-like in appearance. When you look back in ancient cultures, you're going to find these dragon gods, these serpent gods, these serpentine-like statues of veneration for the gods, descriptions of it over and over and over again. They'll have a serpent-like appearance, possibly wings. Usually, if they have wings, they're not like leathery like a dragon. They're more feathered. You'll find that These creatures are often spoken of as being shapeshifter-like. There's associations with jewels and riches, also possibly having hooved feet or calved feet. Remember in that Ezekiel verse, when we think about the idea of the stereotypical demon, it's that goat god figure or the hoofed goat figure. Well, these seraphim have these like hooved feet, according to one of the descriptions in Ezekiel. So you'll also notice that most cultures will talk about these creatures as being the center of their education. All civilization came from them. They taught reading, they taught writing, they taught smithing or metallurgy, they taught medicine or which plants and pharmakia is the term I think that's used in Greek in the New Testament. Medicines, healing techniques to use the plants in order to do that. And also, by the way, plants in order to have hallucinogenic experiences as well. Very, very popular stuff that's going on in culture right now, especially with the explosion of Joe Rogan and his podcasts and things that he's talked about in the past. The idea of astrology, the idea of the stars determine your fates, the idea of astronomy, where the planets are in position in the sky, has some sort of direct cosmic impact and effect on you and what's going to happen in your life. Also, strange associations with fertility and also war. And then you're going to see that many of these serpent gods, they'll have associations with the idea of the god of the air, wisdom, cunning, the trickster, music or instrumentation or some kind of entertainment or lyrical quality to them. The association with lightning, the light, the sun and the moon, or the idea of justice. These are all common threads that run through like just about every single culture that venerates these serpent creatures, or what I would argue is most likely these fallen angel beings that, like you had talked about, at that explosion coming out from Babel, they took all the Babylonian religion, all of the culture, all the things that humanity had learned in that pre-flood world, brought it over the flood. It was the explosion that happened in Babylon as far as that occult culture that happened. God separates everybody, sends them all off and scatters them all out. So now you got all of these stories of these similar things, similar characteristics, similar creatures. Over time, they change a little bit. For example, instead of maybe an event happening at a mountain, now it doesn't happen at a mountain, but it happens at a really, really big rock or something like that in, I don't know, India or wherever. I'm just making stuff up. Or instead of it being a lake, they don't have a lake by them, but they do have an ocean. So now the ocean becomes venerated by that culture as being the source from which something springs forth, like the fish people of Dagon or whatever. You'll see this kind of pattern over and over again. From our Western mind, when we sit back and we look at it, it's like isolated. We compartmentalize everything. So it's those guys over there have their weird, strange gods, and those guys over there have their weird, strange gods, and those guys over there, failing to recognize and realize they all have these common threads, these common themes. And what I would argue ultimately is this common origin.
And it's in addition to artifacts and imagery, the thoughts. Okay, so I'm from the 80s and 90s, right? I'm old. And the New Age was a thing, New Age, Reiki, all these different ideas. And in my mind, New Age and astrology, those focuses came to bloom in 1990. That was just kind of how it was always seen. Then, of course, we took your class. My youngest son took the class with me several times. We went through the presentation. And you talk about New Age and New Thought. So some of the phrases, some of the ideas were very at the forefront of my thinking. Then you fast forward a few months later, he's in a class and they're to read a certain excerpt. And he comes home and he reads it to me. And I'm thinking, well, it must be from 1990. No, it's Marcus Aurelius. And so, I mean, that's what is he, 300s? I mean, it is, it sounded exactly like the garbage that you hear now, phrasing, everything. You wouldn't have been able to figure out it wasn't from at least 1990, if not today. So it's just it's the thoughts, it's the theories. There isn't anything new here. This has always been the case over and over and over, kind of with a common origin somewhere.
Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun, that kind of idea. And that's why when you look at architecture, you see these ziggurat step pyramids, whether they're happening in Mesoamerica, in Brazil or whatever, or whether they're happening in Africa, whether they're out in Egypt or whether they're out in China. The same architecture, in many cases, the same mathematical principles and concepts. Once again, it's the same thing over and over and over again. we see these common threads, but we don't recognize just how much Western influence really determines how we view history. Everybody knows that we all came from monkeys, and it was all random, and it was all just a bunch of stuff. And the monkeys just made everything up in order to give cosmic explanations to physical, easy to understand meteorological events, with the modern mind or whatever. And we're like, oh, that totally makes sense. But that's not at all how it happened. And even the Christian will say, well, I don't believe in evolution at all. I just believe in everything surrounding it, involved with it, inside and out in it, and how to view history through that lens, without recognizing that the Bible actually is extraordinarily sufficient in telling us what actually happened in the world. And then the world itself reflects the truth of what it is that the Bible actually says. But we don't take that extra step in order to go do it. We just go, oh, that's a bunch of poppycock and nonsense that everybody became monkeys, Now, let's make sure we don't talk about supernatural things at all, because we all know that the world is not a supernatural place. It's like, wait, what? So I'm just rehashing in my head kind of these things. When we are able to recognize that these creatures, these fallen angels, and then their offspring, the Nephilim, were running around for 1,000 years. They're the origin of all this stuff. So when I talk about dualism, that's them. When I talk about the idea that, okay, think about it, okay? You've got these creatures, these heavenly creatures that have been in God's presence. And all of a sudden, they disobey God. And they come down to earth, and they're just having a free-for-all down here, right? Okay, now what's that Luciferian doctrine again, right? God is evil and vindictive and a jealous super jerk, okay? Okay, well, what would a fallen angel's position on God be? He's been in his presence, knows the glory of God, knows God's super awesome and super cool, decides to disobey God. Turns out God's not all that forgiving about that, okay? Jesus was man and God, not angel and God. He was for us in the plan of salvation for humans, not for angels. So now these angels are like, hey, God, I want to come back. And God's like, that's not happening. And the angel's like, well, you're a super jerk. What are you doing? I thought you're all about forgiveness and love or whatever, And all of a sudden, they're going, no. So now they got the humans. They go, okay, humans, God is a super jerk. He hates you, and you're trapped. You're trapped in this prison that he's got you in down here. Because it's not like you can leave and go back to heaven where you were once comfortable and had everything you wanted and everything was good up there. Now you're stuck in this filth pit, and you're covered in dust and covered in stink and BO from humans and all this stuff. You're trapped. You're in this prison. I want to get out. I want to get out. It's like all of a sudden now we can see where that Luciferian doctrine is coming from. Literally the angels having to cope with or recognize the situation that they put themselves in, but not wanting to admit responsibility. Surprise, surprise. So God's a super jerk. The world, creation's really a prison. They want to get out, but they can't. And then you've got he treats humans like pets. Okay, so now how are you going to gain the trust of human beings that are suspicious of you to begin with? You look like a snake monster. And they got stories about a snake monster that caused all of this stuff to fall apart in the first place. And then you're the snake monster going, no, trust me, guys. I'm not like that other one in the tree. It's like, they're like, I don't want to listen to anything you have to say. They're like, no. God was keeping you as a pet. He was holding back wisdom from you. He's holding back the truth from you. He didn't want you to recognize the truth of who you really are. You're really just like him. You can become just like him. It's like you start seeing this Luciferian doctrine. You start putting it into perspective. There's no scripture that says all this stuff that I'm saying, but it's not a leap. You know what I mean? It's not a leap to figure out where all this stuff comes from. It's that it's them. And I'm not saying humans would have no problems if it wasn't for the snake monsters that did all this. No, that's not it. Humans are the problem. The tree had the snake in it, okay, Satan, and man, not just the snake. Man was there gobbling delicious fruits that were pleasing to the eye without any trouble. Eventually, he was going to do it whether a snake's going to tell him to or not,
And it's through the man as the mediator between God to all of creation that the sin effect ripples out. It really isn't. Satan receives a speech at the same time as the cursing in the garden and such, but it's different. There's an effect on humankind that has to be completely our responsibility. in that story. That's not on. I don't want to say that's not on him, but that doesn't make any sense theologically to blame him, because in some sense the cross doesn't address something with Satan except for victory on our sake or for our sake. So anyway, side note, doctrinal side trip. Okay, keep going.
He's involved. He's a factor. The snake monsters are a factor. They're all part of disobedience to God. And that's what the overall message comes down to, is you got to choose. Are you going to choose the tree with the snake and man and the forbidden fruit in it, and you can have everything you want and you can become your own God? Or are you going to choose the tree of life, where you don't get to become your own God? You are reliant only on God. The tree of life, by the way, in this analogy, is Christ hung up on the cross, on the tree. So he's the tree of life. You don't get to be in control, and you rely entirely on him for absolutely everything, all the way down the board. What are you going to do? And most people are like, nah, I'm good. I'll be in charge. Thanks. And that's what these angels did. So as we kind of move forward, one of the things that I'm trying to point out is nothing's new under the sun, like we were just saying. So when you take this Luciferian doctrine concept and you kind of go, okay, well, I can see how it kind of came about. I can see kind of where it came from. It's a coping mechanism for angels. Now they're talking humanity into going along with it too. And they're just, it's, if I can't have the girlfriend, then no one can. It's that kind of idea, right? We're just going to wreck everything, including humanity. And we're just going to cause God, if God's going to cause me pain by not forgiving me and not letting me get back up to heaven where I belong, is their thinking, then I'm just going to start, knocking all the pieces off the chessboard, so to speak, wrecking and ruining absolutely everything, and cause God as much pain as possible by having him watch what it is that I do to his beloved creation or whatever. So you've got this situation happening and brewing where the abuser is pretending to be the friend of humanity, is buddying up to him as close as possible and saying all the sweet things in the ear, tickling the ear with all of these concepts, these ideas, changing them slightly here and there, letting humanity run away with some of these ideas as well, all the while hating, wanting to destroy, wanting to, murder, death, kill, as Lena Huxley said in Demolition Man. So you start to get more of a fleshed out view of what it is that's going on, what's happening in reality, instead of this weird, almost like I said, Christians are just notorious for having this magical worldview or superstitious worldview, or these worldviews that don't match up with what's actually going on. When you have a little bit of understanding, you have a little bit of history, and you can kind of start putting all these pieces together, so to speak. I'm not trying to be mean or anything. It's just, it's very frustrating. It's very, very difficult to try to talk about this subject sometimes.
Well, and I think if it's a new subject for a listener, it takes a lot of times of hearing some of these ideas for it to even start to make a little bit of sense, because it's a whole new way of, it's not a new way as in like it's just come about in the last year. It's a more big picture view of the trends in the culture and world religion that you see. And I realize it's a long time ago, but if you go back, we did the 3 different movies, and we looked for we looked for the Luciferian doctrine in each of those movies. It was The Matrix, it was Noah, and then some Christmas movie that was painful to watch. I don't remember what
Big Red or Red One or something, right?
Something like that. But I think
it had giants in it.
Start watching TV, start watching shows, start reading books, and looking for these themes of you alone provide your salvation, enlightenment, gaining knowledge, gaining levels, anything like that. You'll see it in business. You see it in Scientology. You see it everywhere. You'll see it. And this is where I think you're right. There are occult principles in the church. We practice a worldview. It's not that we're bowing down to the pentagram, but we are agreeing with one another that there are levels within the community. There's ways to be better. There's ways to be more acceptable to God. All of that's how I started to look at it and started to go, that's my number one, like light bulb, red flag. Wait, if there's a level here, that actually isn't right. That's a good indicator of bad teaching right there. So I hope people would start to notice it, because, everybody who's ever gone through your class says, now you've ruined everything, because now you read books, you watch movies, you watch shows, and you're like, I'm being fed the same lie over and over, and I don't even recognize that it's a pattern.
Well, I even want to take it one step further. Absolutely. And really kind of jump in and show why Christian parents, what to be concerned about, okay, and why this matters. when you understand this Luciferian doctrine concept, the idea that reality is nothing but a prison that you need to escape from. And in order to escape from it, you have to have the correct worldview. And if you gain the correct worldview, then you can do anything, you can transform, and you can become as God is. Now, take a look at all the insanity going on in Western culture for like the last 10 years and start applying that idea. Can we see that anywhere on a college campus? Can we see the idea that somebody feels trapped in the physical body that they're in and that they need to escape that body? And in order to escape, they have to have the new mindset, the new thinking, the new way of understanding reality, that I can just choose whatever I want to choose, and then I can become that thing by naming it and claiming it and just deciding I am that thing now. And now everybody else is going to magically, because that's what magic is, they're going to acknowledge this new reality, go along with the new reality that you're creating by calling you the name that you now want to be called. That's a different name that you had first semester, okay? And now you can start moving forward in that transformation. You can be the union of the opposites through the middle path, become that new God figure that's venerated in culture, celebrated everywhere. No one will say anything negative about for fear of reprisals. Do you see kind of where I'm going with this? It is the same old thing, repackaged, replayed, repurposed, and it's all playing out within 20-something teens, 20 and 30-something communities in the United States on college campuses. Yes, some of the rhetoric has died down, but I promise you this issue is still playing out, and it's still happening today. We can even look at another concept or idea. We'll take postmodernism, for example. Now, postmodernism is the idea that reality is actually whatever you decide it is. You can just make up something in your head, and that's just as legitimate as an idea that somebody else has in their head as well. It's, once again, it's the magic concept. You determine reality. You repeat it enough times. Other people will eventually go along with it, and it will, quote, become reality. But it's also about transformation. It's about taking the olds and transforming it into the news. So we have these old fuddy-duddy way of doing things in culture and society, the idea of traditional family units, this fuddy-duddy nonsense of family stability. Any family in any shape, in any way, can be just as good as any other. So now we have a bunch of women running around that are, I don't need no man telling me what to do. They got 12 different kids from 12 different guys. Now they're on, their husband ends up becoming daddy government, and their life is better as a result. And their family structure is just as valid as the old fuddy-duddy family structure. It's the same ideas, okay? Repackaged, represented, bought and sold in a public that is in the tree of knowledge. They're the man with Satan, the snake, or the snake angels, eating the forbidden fruit, getting the forbidden knowledge, thinking they've figured it out. They are gaming the system, or they're having a better way, or you can't tell me my way's not, worse than family stability. You know what I mean? It's the same idea.
Postmodernism was always very frustrating because I had a professor at Moody say, everybody wants to determine their own morality until I walk in the room and I want to boil you in oil and set you on fire. Now you're going to have a problem with something. You're going to have but if my law says I think that's a good way to act, you can't refute it. It is an illogical worldview. But as it's progressed into this generation, like my kids' generation, the idea that logic exists at all is gone. I think even in the first parts of postmodernism, you didn't see that as much. But as it's come full circle, actually, that professor kind of predicted where things would go, and it's there. And so there's no logic, there's no reasoning. Everyone's like, well, if we would just sit down and explain it, but there's no definitions, there's no hard lines, there's nothing. And so me saying, I think it's right to light you on fire, they'd be like, well, no, you're wrong. But I'm like, well, it's illogical. Doesn't matter. Logic doesn't exist. It's the grayest thing of all. It's so anyway, it is everywhere. It has seeped into culture. And the number one place you're going to see it is in college. And at some point, I know you'd like to make the presentation available in some format. And I think that's the best idea we've had so far, because
I don't know about that,
except for those movie reviews. Those were really great. My 3 kids have all been through this on some level, some more than others. But they went to school, even though there was one went to public school for a while, but they all ended up at a Christian university. The ideas are still coming through at Christian universities. And they had that, not even a filter. It's much more of a shield. Like, wait, I know what that is. And if they didn't know and they had a question, I think they felt they had a resource in you. So that way, in making this presentation available, I think it would give people something to refer to in order to educate their kids before they enter that arena. And I know it sounds like doom and gloom, like, oh, you're going to go to college and they're all going to be. It happens. I have seen it in so many different families of the friends of my kids. They come back and they don't. Everything changed. Everything. And you can't understand it. You can't figure out where it's coming from. Some of it's coming from these philosophies.
Well, and that's
There's
just
your commercial. You're welcome.
Well, that's the weird part about all this. It's like you start talking about angels and demons, the Christian turns off, but they don't realize what you're talking about is their kid going to college. They don't understand that these ideas have this origin in this, whatever, Atlantis. You can call it whatever you want to. Like you say, it doesn't. Here's the other part. It doesn't matter if Atlantis is real. There's nothing about the occult that's real. That's the other thing people get hung up on. They're like, there's no such thing as Atlantis. Therefore, there's no such thing as snake monster demons and all this other. None of it's real. It's all a lie. And the lie worked. Satan didn't tell them, Adam and Eve, something true. He lied. Okay, you know what I mean? So it's like, that's the part that like shocks me about all this stuff. Well, I don't want to hear about those evil things. You mean the evil things that don't actually exist, aren't actually real, but can actually harm you. That's how goofed up this all is. None of it's true. None of it's real, but it can absolutely destroy your family. It can absolutely destroy your kid. And that's the part that's so frustrating about this is that people think when we're talking about angels and demons, you're going to draw pentagrams out there, sacrifice a chicken, and do some weird stuff. It's like, no, I'm talking about your kid going to college and working on the school newspaper. That's what I'm talking about. But they don't understand the concepts. Look, critical theory comes from this fallen angel religion. Marxism comes from this fallen angel theory. Feminism comes from this fallen angel concept. Postmodernism, transhumanism, queer theory, critical race theory, all the stuff that most Christians have been scratching their head over, wrestling with for the last 15 years, in a minimum in culture and on social media, getting canceled over and all that other stuff. It is this fallen angel religion repackaged, represented, relied, rebranded, more lies added. It's just got a cultural shine and a cultural veneer that looks like 5 nose rings and half a shaved head, saying you're oppressing me because, sorry, dear. Yeah, something. I realize I have long hair and look like a stink monkey hippie that smells like patchouli. Like, I get it, okay? But this is what it is. This is what's going on. I want to even, and I keep saying stuff like, everything's the devil. Everything's the devil, all right? And what I mean by that is, I just went through a list of all the stuff that's been plaguing the United States, the Western world in general for like the last 15 years. Let's go back even older. Where did the first kings come from? The concept of a king. We've talked about this before. Yahweh, God, the one true God, was the king of Israel. He was their king. And then because the nature of what it means to be human, you're caught up in the physical world, in the physical things. You're like, no. See all those other tribes and all those other guys, all the occult guys, by the way, we were just talking about, they used to be part of Babylon or the Tower of Babel, but they got split up. They all got kings. We want to be more like them. So thanks, but no thanks. Can you give us a physical king? Why this is so offensive? See, people, the average Christian will read the Bible and go, I don't see what the big deal is. I grew up watching Disney movies. Kings were a part of the past. I liked Braveheart. He had to fight a bunch of kings. There's all this king stuff going on. Where's the concept of the king come from? When you had the angels come down and they hugged and kissed a bunch of women, every single culture's got a story of this. There was this one god called Poseidon. Maybe you've heard of them, all right? And he went out and he had Clymene. Clymene was, there's a few different names for her, but that was his human wife. And then he founded Atlantis. And Atlantis was this concentric ringed land, water thing. And in the center of it had fresh springs of water. his temple was there, and he had the trident. So he had the trident, the three-pronged devil fork thing. He scraped it in the ground, and that's what he carved out and made Atlantis look like. That's based off the trident. And then him and Clymene had 5 sets of twins. So he had 10 children, and they were all twins. Once again, it doesn't matter if none of this really happened or not. It doesn't matter. It's the story. It's the idea. It's the symbolic significance of what that means. Those half-breed children, the half-human, half-angel, or half-god, whatever you want to call it, the demigods, okay, like Hercules, Perseus. We've all heard the stories of these creatures before. We think of them more like being human because they look like humans, or they look like the guy that played Superman in that one movie. I'm trying to think of what it was called. It doesn't matter. Mickey Rourke was in it, and he still looks like hamburger face. But so you got this. They have the kids. There's the 5 sets of twins, and then they become the first kings. Atlantis was broken up into 10 regions, and each one of the twins had a region that it governed. The first king of the known world was somebody called Atlas. That was the firstborn. So out of all the twins, out of all the sets, the very first one that was born was Atlas. Atlas holds the weight of the world on his shoulders. We've seen that symbol before. We've seen the idea of the man holding up, and it's not even the earth, it's the universe. So he's even greater than holding up the earth. He's holding up creation. You see where I'm going with all this stuff. So when you start looking at the idea of Prometheus being the one who brought fire, knowledge, and wisdom to man, and that man got burned with it, okay, that's the snake in the tree. You see what I mean? Bringing wisdom, and then human beings got burned by believing his lie and getting the wisdom. It's the same stuff, the same stories over and over and over and over, to the point where I feel like I'm going crazy sometimes, because I'm like, can't you? It doesn't matter if Atlantis is real. It doesn't matter at all. It's like all these stories and all these things of all this stuff that happened. Okay, you got a bunch of dudes running around. Here's something that happens. Apparently, I'm just going to run away with it. So after they got all the kings running around, right? Then what happens? Well, then God in the Bible says, everything's going crazy beans down there. It's all evil all the time. Mankind is running amok. I'm limiting everybody's life to 120 years. Now you got an issue, because like we talked about last week, where do demons come from? We don't know for sure. But according to the information in the Bible, and you start comparing it to other pieces of literature that are out there, it seems that the Bible distinguishes between angels and demons, or evil spirits, or restless spirits, or wicked. I forget the other term that it uses specifically all the time. It distinguishes between the two. They're not the same according to the Bible. So what are demons? The idea would be it's the immortal soul of the angel monster, but the mortal body of the human. So it gets separated. The body gets killed. The Nephilim body, the giant body, gets killed, but there's a immortal essence to them that's still floating around out there doing all this shenanigans and doing all this stuff. So you got a situation where they're panicking, okay? And they're like, we used to be running around and everything was fine. And remember, it was 1,000 years that these monsters were running around, the giants were running around, making war on humanity, subjugating them underneath their kingship and their authority. And it's not just the 10 of them, by the way. There were like 200 angels that came down, and a whole bunch of them were hugging and kissing women, okay? It's not like you do that once, you're like, done. I risked heaven. I got kicked out of heaven. I can't go back. And all I want to do is one time. That was all I wanted to do. You know what I mean? Like, for crying out loud, that's not how it works, all right? So all these half-breed kids are running around, half angel, half human, giants. We see the reverberational effects of that going on, especially even after the flood with Aga Bashan and Goliath, a very, very popular giant, okay? He didn't just have gigantism. Anyways, jumping back. Okay, so in the old times, so now they've got a problem. They're dying, and they didn't expect that, I don't think. So now all of a sudden they're like, okay, well, how do we prevent ourselves from dying? Well, and we don't know for sure, okay, that this is exactly what's going on, but this will make sense in just a second. All of a sudden, maybe they were ruling the humans, and maybe they were kind of mean jerks every now and then, but as long as they were getting their milk and honey, everything seemed to kind of be okay. Right up until the point where they start dying. Right up until the point where now they've got a problem. They've got to figure this out so that, you know what? I wonder if I can grind up a human and I can gobble him up. He's got some of the genetics that I need. He's got the blood. He's got the flesh. I can put that inside of my body that's going to die, and then I'll be able to live longer. I'll get immortality. I'll go on beyond this. I know it sounds like I'm making stuff up, but if you look at the ancient texts, you look at all this stuff, all of a sudden, kind of like out of nowhere, the idea of cannibalism kind of gets introduced into human culture. The idea of drinking blood, the vampire, the vampire, however you want to call it. What does Dracula do? He drinks up the blood of people, and he's immortal. He lives forever. This is the story of these creatures. And by the way, the Nephilim apparently very, very pale skinned. Their visage was that of a viper. They got fangs. Okay. And what do? They go on, put their snake fangs onto some young girl's neck. And she's like, oh, you're so super cute. You look like Brad Pitt and stuff. And he's like, and he gets her, starts sucking her blood out of her. And she starts shriveling up, becoming an old lady. And then he stays immortal. He stays young. You see where these stories come from. All right. And I know people are like, oh, that's a real stretch. No, it's not, dude. Lilith. Okay. In Kabbalistic Jewish tradition, Lilith is the first husband, the first wife for Adam before Eve. And he rejects her because she was like gobbling children and stuff. And she becomes like this succubus creature of the night who drinks the blood of people. All right. And that's the vampire. And then you look at like Vlad the Impaler and whoever that one psycho queen was that one time, who is bathing in the blood of like virgin girls all the time in order to stay young. This idea is over and over. It comes from someplace. And by the way, they're the kings, okay? They're the royalty. Well, so much better than all of you. Give me your peasants so that I might stay immortal forever. It's like the whole thing is insane. I feel like a crazy person saying this out loud. But then you look at like kings and queens act so different from regular people. They believe they're better. They wear the gold crown because that's a halo showing their divinity. It's like, how come all the pharaohs are like, they're all god kings, okay? I know I'm jumping around. Pharaohs are god kings. Kings are god kings. They're all god kings. Where do we see in history the idea of half man, half god being better than everybody else, wanting to drink everybody's blood and living forever? I don't know. Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, the ancient world, the pre-flood world. Now all of a sudden you're like, really? God wanted to destroy absolutely everything because men were super naughty. Okay, men are super naughty now. There was that whole mid-century German thing that went on. It's not like those dudes were great guys, okay? It was really, really, really bad. If God's going to end the world or flood everything again, I feel like that would be like a really good point in history to do it. You know what I mean? But no, he lets that go, okay, for whatever reason. Meaning it was really, really bad by human standard, but it wasn't as bad as whatever it was that was going on for 1,000 years before in that pre-flood world. That was really bad. Whatever they were doing, people thinking that you got the half god king and all this stuff. So now you start looking at human history. You're like, do you really want to go showing your kids Cinderella? Do you really want to show them, Titan, who has the staff? He's the friendly god king of Ariel, the Little Mermaid. You know what I mean?
All right. You're crossing the line. I'm just kidding.
It's like that's the problem. Is like I sound insane when I say this stuff, but when you do the research and you look at it, I get that it's not supported by quote unquote modern science or whatever. I get all that. You know what, dude? I believe the Bible. I don't need some stuffy guy in a tweed coat with elbow patches, smelling like day old tobacco and desperation. Okay, for his. I almost said something I shouldn't. I don't need them to validate
every week.
His interns or whatever they call the student, the TAs.
Where is it? I'm completely drawing a blank. And you're going to know where it talks about we'll return to the days of Noah. Like, where is that in that New Testament?
That's that whole bit where Jesus is talking. Matthew, I think Matthew 24. He's like, all his buddies are all walking out of the temple or whatever, and then he's like, no stone will be left atop of another, and he kind of goes over that whole thing. And as in the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man, or the days of the Son of Man, or I forget what the exact verse is. I have it in my stacks of information and stuff. It changes things when you think about that.
Yeah. I was going to say, if nothing else, take those ideas of what what could have been being practiced, which all of these ancient different perspectives try to put as a story, like you say, whether it's real or not. The events, the themes, the actions, all of those spiritual tones were somehow there. And then you look at what violence must have taken over the world that it would be destroyed. And then to have that frame of time referred to so significantly as something unique, I think all of those things have to make you look at it. And as much as you're like, I feel like I'm crazy. And I'm like, well, I feel like I'm crazy because I believe you. It took a lot of times of hearing the idea. So I just encourage people to really think it through.
Here's the thing about that. Okay. What exactly does Jesus mean? I don't know. I got a few different ideas. I don't know for sure. Okay. But here's what I do know. You had a genetic mixing of some kind at a minimum going on with humans and angels. The Bible says that. And now what do we have going on today? Can we imagine genetic mixing happening in any way, shape, or form today? I don't know. Glow-in-the-dark pigs, anyone? Or how about genetically modified foods? We're putting the genes of a jellyfish into the potato, so that way when the potatoes get dehydrated and it's nighttime, a farmer can look out on his field and know he's got to water them. We have the genetic mixing going on already. Then you look at the idea of cannibalism, okay? Do we see any evidence of cannibalism, a resurgence or a repopularity of this idea? I don't know how many different TV shows, Walking Dead, zombies right there, okay? There was one with Drew Barrymore and the guy from Justified. I think they were like joking around. I never watched the show, but they were in LA or something, right?
Like a comedy suburb type thing. Yeah.
Right.
I remember that one.
And they're cannibals or they're really zombies or whatever it was. And then you Google the idea, just Google cannibalism, human flesh, solve global warming. The number of quote unquote scientists that are coming out and saying, it looks like we're going to have Soylent Green for everybody, guys, in order to make it through this whole global warming thing. Just as the days of Noah, so will be the days of the coming of the Son of Man. You keep seeing these ideas. Remember, I said 10 kingdoms, right? Okay. So Atlantis was broken up into 10 global regions, 10 global kingdoms. And what do we have? The idea of whether it's the World Economic Forum or I can't think of the other global institution that broke down the world into 10 economic trading blocks. So that's already been done. Okay. And I'm not trying to be alarmist and say, see, that means Jesus is coming. I don't know when he's coming. All I am going to say, 2,000 years, his anniversary's coming up. You know what I mean? A little bit of poetry going on there. I'm just saying, okay? But we take a look, and once we break down and understand the stuff, the crazy psycho stuff that was going on in the pre-flood world as a result of the direct intervention by the interdimensional snake monsters, all of a sudden things start looking a little bit different when we start seeing some of the scripture, especially understanding of what's going on. I get that there's a lot of people right now that are like end of days watchmen that are all online watching the news to see what goes on in Israel. I'm just going to throw it out there, guys. All right. What happens with Israel wasn't the first thing you guys should have all set up and paid attention to. Cloning Dolly the sheep, that was a big deal. That was a huge deal. Genetic modification, possibly cloning people, all the stuff that one psycho guy who, what's his name? The guy that dude was super into genetic research and funding weird stuff on his creepy island, okay? And he wanted to live forever and have blood transfusion of kids and stuff. Like, it's all this, it's always the same stuff. Mm-hmm. And then people are like, no, didn't you hear what Israel's prime minister said the other day? No, but you know what, dude? I know who Dracula was, okay? And I know what he was all about and what he was doing. And now you got these super billionaire guys. You got some dude drinking the blood of his 24-year-old son. I can't even think. I have to find the article on this. Or transfusing the blood of his 24-year-old son in order to stay eternally young. Like,
isn't there some, and Kelly might know this, like using blood to preserve youth for women, like putting it on their faces? I can't remember what that was, but that's been recently.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
There's different ones. There's the process where you use your own blood and they spin out the plasma and then they make like a plasma mask. There are a lot of like local salons and spas that do that. But there's also other ones where you use like fetal blood. Yeah.
Yeah, these people are so sick, man.
Pretty commonly spoken of. It's not like a secret thing. I think
you can Google it. Anybody who has the money to pay for it, you could go into a salon in LA and have it done. This isn't This isn't some like secret unknown thing.
And that should like at least cause you to go, huh? I mean, like that it doesn't, that it's being openly put out there as something people are willing to do. It's just so, you're right. And it's very similar to recognizing abuse pattern. You know, we just want to see these, that's sick and wrong. Oh, that's weird. Oh, that's strange. But it never, ever is put together to see the whole picture. And that same thing happens when we ignore patterns in relationships and we don't see that they're connected, that they mean something, they have a theme, and they're all the same and they all end in some kind of abuse. This is the same idea.
And that's just it. You know, you got these, if we were to house all of this, I call it the occult because that's what it is. It's not this group or this group or this group or this group. It is the concept. It is the idea. I'm going to go on a limb. There's a bunch of people out there that are like the synagogue of Satan. And they're like, oh, it's the Jews who pretend to be Jews, but they're not Jews. It's the Erev Rav, or it's the Khazarians, or whatever people say. It's the serpent seed. It's the Nephilim seed. It's the occult. It's people that venerate this concept that you can become as God is, you can do whatever you want, and it only shows up in a few different ways. It shows up in symbolic architecture, union of the opposite through the middle path. It shows up in dualism, the idea of this hermetic system. It shows up in the sacrificing of children. It shows up in the drinking of blood, in the eating and the cannibalism. It's not random stuff that has no significance and doesn't mean anything. It's only a few things, and anybody can learn what this stuff is. Dude, I'm not that smart. And if I could figure this stuff out over time, just because I guess I wouldn't put it down. I wouldn't walk away from it because it's psycho. It's just all psycho. You start seeing these patterns coming up over and over again. Look, and the whole synagogue of Satan thing, okay? Just for all you guys out there that are like, oh, it's the Jews. From John's point of view, John was like a correct Jew, recognized the truth of the Messiah, believed in the promises of God, and accepted the truth of who Christ was, that he came and he was the propitiation sacrifice, the perfect sacrifice, the blood of the Lamb for humanity. So from John's point of view, he's a Jew. He's a correct Jew. All right. And then for him to point to who is the synagogue of Satan. Well, synagogue was a place of learning, knowledge, wisdom, enlightenment, okay? That was something he can relate to, a building that was the location of that and the concept of that. And then the synagogue of Satan. Well, who's Satan? He's the fruit tree. He's the tree with man. He's the angel monster. He's the Nephilim. He's the kings. He's this system, this Babylonian world system. That's what's going on. It's the most symbolic book in the Bible. Is all of it shouldn't be taken literally, guys. Not all of it. All right. Are there some evildoers that John probably had in mind at the time? Probably one or two. Okay. I'm sure there were some jerks running around then. But what is the synagogue of Satan? What is the seed of Satan? It is this occult concept, this whole system that shows up in certain ways that you can identify eventually over time because the pattern is always there. Just like an abuser. You meet a guy, you've been kicked around enough by enough dudes that are super jerks. By the time you're 50 and you see your niece dating some guy, he reminds you of your third boyfriend. You know what I mean? Whoa. I've seen this before. I know exactly I don't know exactly what he's going to do, but I've seen this before. That's what I'm trying to communicate and why this matters and why it's so important. It's not just angels and demons. It's this whole wider thing that is a reflection of how reality has been manipulated and how it shows up, and we all live in it without recognizing the truth of what it is or its source.
And it appeals at the core. It always comes back to, I want to interpret, attain, understand God through my own reference point. I want to choose my way. And that too can show up in Christianity. I want to understand it through my program, my idea, my tiered system, whatever that is. There's so much of mankind desires so desperately to do it himself. That's the core of the biblical, sin core of why all of these forms of thinking, forms of lifestyle, they appeal to us. And you can find it in absolutely everything. It's not going to just be these 6 world religions. It's the mankind's mindset. That's hard to say, but that's what it comes back to.
It's not just Metallica's greatest hits. It's not just that rock and roll music. It's not just serial killer movies or whatever. Correct. It's the whole thing. People, you got to wisen up, man. Please, please, I'm begging you. Please get wisened up to this stuff and what's going on, because at some point humanity will be in the end times. At some point it will. If that's far enough down the road, I'm not going to be alive, and Kelly and I don't have kids. You know what I mean? So it's not like I'm going to be passing this on to anybody. People need to be able to get educated in this stuff so they can teach their kids, and they can teach their kids, and their kids can teach their kids. You don't make it the focus in the center of your life, but you have to know that it exists. So that way, when it shows up in your home, it shows up in your entertainment, it shows up in your life or in your friend's life or your niece or your nephew's life, you can talk to them about it. And you're not just shaking a finger at them going, it's the devil. That's not going to work. Don't you realize if you put a keep off the grass sign in front of somebody, most people will be like, guys, let's go play some football on this guy's grass. That's just how we are. So it's the devil. That's all it's going to do is make them run to it, for crying out loud. So it's like, please, people, please.
And the final thing you're saying, where they can recognize it, they need to be able to recognize it in the church.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the areas and one of the places where I see enough of it. It's not as blatant, it's not as open, and it's not as obvious. And once again, it's not like everybody in there's a Satan worshiper or anything like that. But what we do know is that Christ told us in John 15 or John 13, I forget where it's at, the parable of the wheat and the tares. The wheat are the real believers that are spirit indwelt, that really do believe, and they get wrapped up by the tares. And the tares look just like wheat, sounds just like wheat, smells just like wheat, dresses just like wheat, and shows up to church on Sunday just like wheat. But it ain't wheat. Now, whether they know it or not, I don't know. But Christ is clear that that's the truth of the situation. So if those occult influences are coming into the church, once they take root and take hold, it's going to be really hard to get them out, because the tares, it's going to tickle the ears and tickle the belly of the tares. They're not going to want to let go of it, and they're going to come up with really good explanations for why you're the problem right now for trying to get back to the roots of what the Bible is. It's just the nature of humans. It's not, I'm going to ruin this church. It's not like that. It's just the nature of man. Like, all the Bible does is say over and over again, you have a sin nature, you have a sin nature, you have a sin nature. And the Christians are like, can you believe Bob did that? I don't understand. Why would Bob do that? Because Bob has a sin nature, just like you. It's so. I don't know. What else did I mean, I didn't even talk about the aliens. I didn't talk about the DMT monsters and the jesters and the machine elves and all the other stuff.
And maybe that's for
maybe a part 2. I'm just saying. Maybe I can stop sweating so much and calm down from all this stuff. And we'll do another episode where I can talk about that. By the way, here's a spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. DMT elves, they're demons. Okay? UFOs and aliens, they're fallen angels and demons. There isn't any other thing. There's no other supernatural creature with the exception of maybe Bigfoot, okay? And only because I really like eating that guy's beef jerky. I'm just saying.
You are the strangest person I've ever known.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
You're welcome. On that note, thank you very much for joining us for this episode. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching me sweat and scream and yell and get red-faced and whatever else I was looking like while I was doing this. I hope that you took some value from this and really are able to realize and recognize this subject is it's not what the movies, it's not what the liars in Hollywood have been presenting it as to you this entire time. It's much different. It shows up differently. And I hope that you've learned something from what we talked about in this episode. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk again next time. Hey, thanks for listening to Naughty versus Nice. If this episode hit home for you, or, got us stepped on your toes a little, but in a good way. Go ahead and like, follow, and leave us a review. It helps us out way more than you could possibly know. We're on all the socials at Naughty Versus Nice. That's VERSUS Nice. And if you believe in what it is that Laura and I are doing, you can definitely pop on over to patreon.com/Naughty Versus Nice and give us a hand there as well. Thanks for walking this road with us as we have these conversations, talk about these wider concepts, and discuss what it means to be followers of Christ. We really appreciate you joining us, and we'll talk at you next time.